Hi, everyone, and welcome to our sales-focused fireside chat with some wonderful women in sales. And I'll kick things off with our introing our speakers. I want to just cover a few housekeeping items before we start. So if you're experiencing any issues while watching this webinar, please let us know. This is a web-based platform. So closing a couple of windows, refreshing the window can also help alleviate some of that connectivity issues. We are also recording this webinar, so you will receive this recording within 48 hours via email, and that link will be provided to you, like I mentioned, in the email. So definitely let us know, though, if you are experiencing any issues. We do have a team member on our end that's monitoring our Q&A chat box. That is a one-to-one communication that you can let us know if you're experiencing any issues. Also utilize that Q&A chat box to let us know if you have any questions for our experts today. We're going to be answering questions at the end, but feel free to submit throughout. We also have a survey in the bottom panel of your screen. There's a little taskbar, and in there, there's a survey. We'd love for you to let us know how these webinars are performing, this one in particular. We are kicking things off with this Women in Sales Fireside Chat series. We'll be doing a couple more sessions of these throughout the year. But we'd love to hear from you, our fellow women in sales, any topics or any interest around the women in sales in itself that you'd like to take a deeper dive into, and we can utilize that information for future webinars. All righty, last housekeeping item for today. ZoomInfo is a publicly traded company. This presentation may contain forward-looking statements. Any buying decisions you make should be made based only upon currently available products and offerings. This is our complete safe harbor statement here for your review. If you'd like, read all that fine print. Alrighty, so I want to just talk through the topics that we're going to cover today. And while I do that, I just launched a poll for you all. Audience members, we'd love to understand who you are in your company, what level you're at, so that we can best cater this conversation to you. So while you're answering that poll, we're going to cover topics, insight on the current sales industry from a women's perspective, how to recruit women into your sales team with the right incentives, how to better coach and train those on your team to keep your talent. And we'll also then hear from what women are looking for as they evaluate the next step in their career. So definitely, those are the topics we're going to be covering today. And we have some amazing women from this wonderful fireside chat panel. And I'm going to do a little roll call for everybody, and then we're going to have them give us a little high-level overview of who they are and their journey in sales. So kicking things off first, we've got, let me get my speaker slide up here. We've got Carol Mahoney. She's the founder of Unbound Growth. We have Karen Kopp, who's our chief door opener from Kopp Consulting. We have Stephanie Valenti, who's a CRO at our partner and wonderful customer, SmartBug Media. And then we also have ZoomInfo's very own Marissa McNeely. She's a manager here on our account management team. So thank you, ladies, for joining us today. And Carol, I'd like to kick it off with you. If you can start the high-level overview of who you are and your journey into sales.
Oh my, so my journey into sales, in short, was kicking and screaming, resisting it the entire way along. I actually got my degree in marketing because my goal was to make sales unnecessary. That's how little I liked the idea of sales. I thought the internet's going to take out the need for salespeople. And so I, shortly after leaving the workforce, which is another story, I started a marketing agency to do exactly that. But the thing that I found, and why I got into what I'm doing now, is that I found that as a marketing agency, I had a lot of clients who were difficult. I had a revenue roller coaster happening because as I was bringing in new clients, I kept having to replace them because this dynamic that kept happening was that the buyers that they were selling to were educated, internet powered, and they were using tactics that were, let's just say, outdated on today's internet buyer. And so as a result, they weren't able to close sales, and so they couldn't afford marketing anymore. And so it was just this catch-22 that was happening. And if my mission, and like the whole reason I started doing this, was to help companies grow, to create jobs, if I was going to do that, then I needed to change my own mindset towards sales. So I hired a coach, and as a result of that, I really started digging into the psychology and the science behind how we change our behaviors and make our decisions. And I realized at that point that sales is about being buyer first, about focused on another person, helping them to solve a problem. And that selling isn't something we do to other people, like manipulation and tactic. It's something we do with them in collaboration to solve problems. So today, I've transformed into now consulting, training, and coaching companies who are driven for growth to make hiring decisions and developing their teams using science and behavioral sciences. I love seeing things grow. And so for me, the favorite part of what I do is when I get those messages and emails from sellers and leaders that tell me about the goals that they've reached and how they never really even thought it would have been possible before. For me, that's like Christmas morning when I get those kinds of messages that talk about that. So those are the reasons why I do what I do every day and why I love sales today, because I have a different understanding of it.
Wonderful. I love that perspective. Karen, why don't we, I'd love to hear your high-level overview of who you are and your journey.
Okay, great. Well, I'm Karen Kopp. People know me as the Chief Door Opener because our company gets our clients in the door with their prospects, who are usually at the executive level, for the first meeting. The people come to us when it's not that easy to get in the door. I'm waiting for somebody to come to me with something easy, but that's not typically what they come to us for. And we get them in for these high-level meetings. It's an outsourced service, a done-for-you, done by senior-level business developers who are known as door openers, who represent our clients in the market professionally and get these doors open. So my journey of, well, how much time do you have? But when I was 11, I had my first cold calling job. It goes all the way back to that. I babysat for a family that owned a lawn doctor franchise, and the mother said to me, "Hey, you have a good phone voice. Why don't you go to one of our cubicles in the basement and pick up what was at the time a phone book and call people and see if they would like to meet for free lawn evaluations?" Well, what was interesting about that is at 11 years old, like now that's a Department of Labor issue, but at the time it wasn't. I found it very easy. And I thought it was fascinating that I could vary the tone of my voice. I could change my words. I could change my phrases, and that would change the outcome. So even at that age, I was noticing these things, which laid the foundation for the work that we do now at Kopp Consulting and getting our clients in the door with their prospects. Messaging, sales messaging in particular, which is different than marketing messaging, is a foundational component of getting these doors open. We have 2 trademarks in sales messaging. We've made a study out of this. So we spend a lot of time there making sure the words and the phrases are right, so that when we're in that performance moment, whether we're on the phone with a prospect or engaged in email back and forth, that we're saying that which will help them to decide that a meeting would be the best decision they make all day. I notice that Carol said to help people to solve their problems. In our world, yes, sometimes it's about problems, but sometimes it's about opportunities to just have a better life. So sales is really about helping people to make decisions that would make their lives better. And when you think of it like that, you're doing the kindest thing you could do for another human, is to help them to make their lives better. And that, to me, is what sales is about.
I love that. I love that. Stephanie, I'd love to hear your journey, especially into CRO of SmartBug Media. That's always an interesting story, in my opinion. But yeah, I'd love to hear your high-level overview and your journey into sales.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I am Stephanie Valenti. As Rebecca mentioned, I am the Chief Revenue Officer for SmartBug Media. And I know that the Chief Revenue Officer title means a lot of different things in organizations, but here at SmartBug Media, I run our sales, internal marketing organization, as well as all client delivery and our client services department. And so it was quite the journey to get where I am today. You know, I got out of school and had no idea what I wanted to do, to the point where I was a very young mother. I had my first child at 19. And so I worked a lot of jobs in the beginning. I had done restaurants and kind of climbed up all the way to the corporate office there through management roles. And then I'm like, what's next? There wasn't anything next. So then I went into medical, and I'm like, well, maybe I should try my hand at being in the medical industry. And I started in the front desk, and then I got to medical billing, and then I worked to the back office. And it's like, well, I can't be a doctor, right? I'd have to go back to school for that. And so someone tapped me on the shoulder and they're like, Stephanie, like, you just are too hungry. Like, you've got to go try sales. They threw me into car sales, which is a great and wonderful experience for someone that's never sold before. I did that for a couple months. I learned some good foundational knowledge, and Staples business division, Staples Advantage is what it was called, grabbed me up as a business development rep. And from there on out, I was in love, right? It was cold calling, it was call day, it was discovery meetings, all in person in field, and it was helping businesses grow, save money, do things more efficiently. And it was, if I look at all the things I had done before, I wanted to help people, right? I wanted to help businesses and I wanted to help them grow better. And by allowing myself to put that overlay on top of what I was doing, it made me stronger at it made me comfortable, right, with selling. And so in between there, I've had various leadership roles. I actually took a sidestep into operations as a COO, which really taught me a lot of how to be a better sales leader for my counterparts, right, and a revenue leader, which was a lot of fun, but really excited to what I'm doing today. The company's wonderful, and yeah, so that's just a little bit about me.
Love it. Love it. I'm feeling a theme here. But Marissa, I'd love to kick things off with you as well. Love to hear your journey, whether it's at ZoomInfo or prior to ZoomInfo. I'd love to hear your journey and your journey to sales.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my name is Marissa McNeely. I'm an account manager here. So I manage on our renewal and growth side here at ZoomInfo, coming up to my 5-year anniversary. So as far as sales and my journey, sales is in my blood. I have always been surrounded by it. My grandfather was a fruit peddler immigrant. So he, started with sales, and my mother also was in real estate when I was a baby. She would bring me selling houses when I was little, and then later in her tenure, she went into educational software. But always growing up was trying different sales jobs, different industries, and my father was an accountant all his life and would always question, like, why is it like there's the unknown of sales, but she always instilled that that's the most exciting part. Like, you get to create your own destiny with sales, truly. And so I had that growing up. So there was no question that when it was time for me to get my own journey started, that sales would be what I would go into. It wasn't what I necessarily studied. I was an English and women's studies major. But I think those are things that can be correlated very well into the sales world. Being able to communicate is key. And so, my first job was TJ Maxx at 15. Can't say that the discount was good enough to keep me, but went into boutique selling that was high end and like outsold. Being able, in a small town in Portsmouth, being able to outperform other employees there, and then really got a taste for commission. Like, that's really where I was like, oh, okay. So if I work harder, I can see the direct correlation in my paycheck. And that was in my teens. And it allowed me to then really start exploring what that meant for my next venture. And so worked from there into other individual contributor roles, whether it was print and web advertising for an alternative news weekly that I then ended moving into management, and then making industry changes, which I think was important for my growth, but also for me to understand where my strengths were. Worked in educational sales, also as individual contributor and as management, to then land here to be able to understand the full sales cycle. So at ZoomInfo, I was an individual contributor. I also was on the new business side as a manager, and now a manager on our renewal and growth. So I think bringing that full circle for the customer, for my team, being able to take my 10 plus years of management, 20 plus years of sales, being able to say, that my, skill set can be, something that can be helpful when coaching and mentoring new folks coming into the organization. So that's my story.
It's fantastic. Wonderful. Wonderful stories all around. And like I mentioned, there's definitely a theme here of looking to help, looking to provide, supportive value to whether it's your customers, your employees or whatnot, your people that you manage. And so audience members, you're definitely in a good spot. If you're here and you're watching this, you are in good hands with these wonderful women. So I'm excited to keep going on this conversation. So I want to just toss out the poll results just to understand who we are in the audience. So ladies, we've got about 57% individual contributors that are in the audience. So definitely we're going to need to speak to those folks. And then next level down would be managers, about 28%, just under that 29%, and executives are about 14%. So that's the mix of the audience. I think it's a nice mix, and we'll be able to talk to each of those folks as best as we can. All righty. So let's get into this conversation. So from what I hear, because I am not in sales, but from what I hear, sales is a fantastic career for top performers, since most sales jobs pay based on, like many of these wonderful women mentioned, results. And so top commissions get paid the best sales, get paid to the best salespeople. So when you work hard in sales, you tend to get better results directly into your bank account. While this is true, sales are still not marketed as a great career for women. So Carol, I'd love to kick things off with you again. Can you please share your insights on the current sales industry from a women or your perspective?
From my perspective, I mean, you heard the story of how I got into sales kicking and screaming, because for me, I didn't want to be that pushy, slimy, sleazy salesperson. And 3% of buyers today say that salespeople are trustworthy, according to a survey from HubSpot. So, I mean, which of us as a kid, when you were asked what you wanted to be when you grew up, said, I want to be a salesperson? Hardly any of us. Yet I also grew up around salespeople. My grandmother owned a real estate agency. My grandfather owned a sporting goods store. And so the idea of sales was just part of my DNA, because if you didn't sell, you didn't eat in my family. But at the same time, I had this perception that you had to be pushy and slimy and sleazy. Yet, like you said, this is the one profession where your efforts are directly tied into your results. But for me, the uncertainty of sales, that's why I avoided it. And can you blame me with nearly half of sellers not making quota every year? And it hasn't changed that much in the past decade. So if we want to attract more women into sales, and what I would have needed earlier in my career to choose sales as a career is to change the perception of what it's actually about. That it's not about the pushy and manipulative tactic. So, it's not about cold calling and getting all hung up on all of the time and all of the negativity that comes with that. I think that if we change the perception, and I believe that we can if we use science, because, I mean, like if you think about it, if sales is the least trusted profession, it's going to be hard to attract other people to it. If we change the perception, we can easily attract more people. So it was when this happens, I think that we can actually start to attract more women to it, that we can actually look at it as, yes, you're going to have to work really hard, but also how do we work even smarter, not just harder? And I think for women, for me anyway, to balance out that uncertainty is what is actually going to work? How are we actually going to be able to do this in a way that's more predictable? That's just my thought on it.
Love it. Love it. Karen, I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, so I'll chime in here. What's really interesting, some insights about what's gone on in the last couple of years. I'll go the remote work route and the flexible work route, because that deserves to be discussed in this forum. People have now figured out what my company has been doing for 22 years. We have always been a remote company from the time I started this company. We hire very experienced sales talent who are located all over the United States, and it works. And you can have a culture like that. You can offer people flexible schedules, flexible work time. You want to work 10 hours a week, you want to work 20 hours a week, you want to work 30 hours a week. That's possible. And you can get paid well for your talent as long as you deliver results. I mean, that has to be there. You have to be able to work remotely. But these options are now available more widespread than ever. When I started this business, it was very uncommon, but there were a lot of people out there Women, not always women with small children, by the way, many people who had been in the workforce for years and years and years, who finally decided that they don't want to work 60 hours and get paid for 40. They would rather work 30 and get paid for all 30, and that opportunity exists. Now it's more widespread than ever before. So for those people who aren't in sales and they're considering going into sales, you can write your ticket. You can write what you want your life to look like and be able to go out there and find that. For those people who are in full-time roles that really prefer more flexibility, ask your employer for more flexibility. You may find that they're more open to it now because they've had to be. Over the last couple of years, they've had to change the way they think about how sales gets done. So things are now possible, opportunities are now possible that weren't possible a lot of years ago, except for a couple of few select pioneers in the industry like Carol.
Wonderful, wonderful. I definitely think it's the last couple of years have changed a lot, and perspective on a lot of different things. And coming from a CRO level, Stephanie's from SmartBug, it'd be interesting to hear from you just how you guys are seeing the industry changes affect your company and what's your perspective on it.
Yeah, so very much like Karen, we've always been remote. We always like to say we were remote before it was cool. And so we are global. We have people across the entire US, but also in other countries across the world. And so, one of the things that you said, Karen, about remote work and having that flexibility and writing your own ticket, I also look at the changes that have been propelled because of the remote work and what's that brought to women, right? So I think about, like, in the past, I remember in my first sales role, you had to wear heels. You had to have a pad folio, right, that was black, and your pin, and you had to be very well dressed going into your appointments. We fast forward to today, and we are looking into people's homes. We are casual. I see women that just went for maybe they just went to a yoga class or for a run, and they're a little sweaty, and then they're getting on with a prospect, and they're having the opportunity to sell. And so this human element that used to really, it felt like it didn't exist in the past, right? Because you had to be so professional within your demeanor, has now been replaced with human-to-human interaction, which has allowed us to break down some of those old stereotypes, right? Like, I even think about, I was coached once in a sales class that you're not supposed to ask people questions that are personal in your rapport building session within your sales process, right? So if you see a picture of a dog on someone's desk, don't ask about it, right? Because you never know what their response is. Today, we have people's kids running in. Of course, you're going to be like, oh, how old are they? It's really, I think, changed the way that sales was positioned. Again, back to that portfolio, to then today, when you're sitting behind a desk and you're in your yoga pants, right? So I think that's allowed a lot of opportunities for us to look at sales in a little bit of a different way.
I love that. Marissa, what's your perspective being a manager and from your career of many different roles as an individual contributor as well? Like, how have you seen this sales industry evolve, or what's your perspective on the industry as a whole? Sorry, Marissa, did you hear me? I think we may have lost her for a moment. All right, well, we will move on. I think we lost her, but we'll come back to her answer for sure. Alrighty, so let's switch into our next section. So we're talking about how to recruit women into sales teams, how to recruit women into your sales teams with the right incentives. So I think this is definitely gonna be an interesting topic for us. And I'm gonna kick things off with you, Karen, first. So what types of incentives are you looking for in your current position or in positions for women as either moving forward or as you're hiring? And I think incentives is such an interesting way to be able to broaden that perspective of sales for women.
Yeah, and so I really need to address this from the perspective of the people who I hire as door openers for Kopp Consulting. And so to work here, people have to have a minimum of 10 years experience in business development and have the DNA, not just the experience, but the DNA who not only can do door openings successfully, but who love this part of the job. If you don't love door opening, it's torture, I can tell you. If you love it, then you get every day to your desk and you're like, okay, great. What are all my little prospect friends doing today? And you can roll up your sleeves and really get to know them. And the people who love this part of the job understand that. And the people who don't, we serve those people, right? And so the other thing is we're looking for people who have also been corporate decision makers in their experience as well. So it's both of those sides where they've sat on both sides of the desk, and they can have the empathy that goes along with reaching out to somebody, and you may know what that feels like because you might have sat on that side of the desk also. So when it comes to the incentives and how do we attract these people, well, we already talked about remote work. So that's probably one of the biggest ones, the flexibility of hours. Somebody put in the chat about the 4-day work week. For us, it's really more about how many total weekly hours, and the fact that our people can spread those out however they want in the course. Like if you feel that Monday is the right time to work for your specific client's target, then do that. If you feel that it's better to move hours into next week, then do that, as long as the monthly hours are where they need to be at the end of the month. So giving these senior level professionals the ability to make those decisions for themselves and have that flexibility as long as they're delivering results, that is an incentive. So both of those things, remote and the flexibility of how to work the time. The other thing that I think is really important, especially from a door opener perspective, is making sure that you're compensating people according to milestones. Although I would say that that's true in a full end-to-end sales role, open through close as well. Not just to be compensated at the very end for the close, but there are a lot of really important steps that happen along the way that need to be celebrated. We like to say congratulations on that next step, because there are big wins along the way. So from an incentive standpoint, we like to provide an incentive for those milestones. And I find that that's very effective as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Stephanie, what types of incentives are you looking for as either female or executive as well when you're bopping around to these different executive level positions, or for even some of the folks that are in the audience that are looking to grow up within their career? What incentives should they be looking for?
Yeah, it changes rapidly as you evolve in your career. I'd say what I was looking for as an entry-level business developer is very different than what I'm looking for today. I do enjoy the flexibility. I think that it's important. Our organization does it well. We call it flex time. It's all about the hours you work in a month, not when you work them, which is very beneficial and helpful to many. For me in my role, although I think it's helpful, my job is to be there for my people. And I can't necessarily have a lot of flexibility in that all the time, right? So although I think it's important for my teams, it's not as important for me, honestly. But I will say that for me, it's all about what are we providing to our teams to allow them to do their best work. And that does include things like commission plans and compensation structures. It includes tools. People forget about that a little bit and they look at the offer letter, but what are you doing to help somebody propel their career forward with the tools that you're giving them to make their job easier? That's important. As you grow within an organization, I like from a compensation standpoint, I think as an executive, you always want some equity within the company to know that all of your investment in time goes to the greater good of the performance of the entire organization, not just to the individual's performance. Outside of that, less about even incentives and more about organizational health and the people that we're working with is something that I really dive into, especially in the interview process. The person you're going to be reporting to, working with every day, what is the health there? But yeah, I way more about what we're going to provide our team with, opposed to what I am provided, for sure.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Marissa's back. Thank you so much for coming back. Sorry that we missed you there for a moment. Our webinar platform sometimes gets a little rocky. So I appreciate you joining us back here. But yeah, so we'd love to hear about incentives, and also just, I think another good point that Stephanie brought up is just benefits, or kind of what is something that you're looking for the company to have that's going to incentivize you as a female to join that company.
Absolutely. So I think playing off what some of the other women said, I think like transparency in a couple different ways. So I think transparency in a career trajectory is important. I know when I interview people that that question is like, where do you see yourself in 5 years, can be sort of a canned question, but I want to know, and I'll frame it differently in an interview process, is really, I want to know if you want to be like a VP of sales, what does that look like for you? And how could I help you work towards that goal? And, you know, motivation is different for other people. So it's important for me to know, if you're going to be on my team, what are we working towards together? And to weave that into our future one-on-ones so that we are consistently talking about not just your forecast and your pipeline, but that we are talking about like, what keeps you here? What drives you to continue to be successful? And so I want to know from day one, like, what brought you to this company and how I can be like your partner through that process, because that's exciting to me. So that sort of like career trajectory, and it's not a straight line for everyone, and it can shift. And so I think that's why it's important to continue to have that conversation as we go through our life changes, and not just what's happened over the past couple of years, but I think as women, our life can change dramatically. And you need a company that will be able to change with you. Because of course, work-life balance is important. Like, I'm a wife, a mother, a daughter, a friend. I need to have some of that. And I will always be a hard worker and prioritize my work. But I think in the past couple of years, and ZoomInfo was not primarily a remote company, but we have been since COVID, even though half of my team was remote prior to it. I think making that shift and realizing what's important, like being home for dinner and being able to make time for the things that are important, those are things that are critical. And I think on the other side of transparency, pay transparency is something that is not very common at many companies, but I think it's something that really needs to be discussed more, specifically for women. Because more often than not, there is a disparate, pay that happens. And so I think advocating for the fact that, our experience for our physical years of experience, but then many of the skills, like, I hate that it's called soft skills, because those are usually the most critical when it comes to being successful. The empathy, the emotional intelligence, like, these are the things in sales that women like innately own, that makes them so successful, that you can teach. But I also think that it's just within many of us that you have to pay for, and you have to nurture. And so I think making sure that that is discussed, and also compensated for. So I think there's many things that I'm looking for. I do belong to an organization that does notice that, but I think as it's becoming more and more competitive out there, companies need to really hone in on what makes good talent and what they have to do to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Carol, all right, why don't you bring us home on this topic? What are some incentives or types of incentives that you look for?
I absolutely love what Marissa said too about in that last sentence about the transparency and those types of things. Because for me, it comes down to two things. Is first, the transparency of the hiring process itself. Like, we talk about transparency of pay and these things, but even like, I have this client that I coached, and that's what makes me think of this. And she told me about how she was up for a leadership role. It was between her and a colleague, and she was told that she needed to come up with a plan for the first 90 days that they would evaluate, that would be like a criteria for them to decide. She found out later on that they ended up hiring the other gentleman. There was no plan asked of him to create. They just decided that he was going to be the better fit. And for her, she was like, I'm out of here. Like, this is not at all the transparency or the things that I was looking for to get to the next level and the next role. So I think that one of the first things that we have to think about when we talk about incentives and transparency, which is what I keep hearing is the common theme, is that we have to think about how we hire and how do we take the bias out of the hiring process. Not only so that we can improve our odds of putting the best person in the role according to our market and our selling environment and our buyer, but also that we can advertise the role in the right way, that we go through the interview process in a transparent way. all the way through to how we actually promote. So there's this consistency and transparency in it. I know for me, if I were that individual who I had coached, I definitely would have walked out of that company as fast as I possibly could. That's a webinar all by itself. But the other thing I think is that we talk about, like Marissa just talked about, who the competition is for the talent out there. And if you think about it, I think it was 4.5 million people left the workforce in November of last year. Since the pandemic began, 63% of those who left were women because they need flexibility. They had to take care of children or elderly parents. Nearly half of the businesses, though, that have been started since the pandemic have been from women. So what that tells me is that our competition isn't another company that's going to take the talent. It's the women who are going to not find what they're looking for in the companies, and they're going to go do it themselves. Like Karen, 20 years ago, she started her business remotely. 20 years ago, I started working remotely. So this is the real competition. And when we think about the incentives, it's the incentives of, yes, flexibility is necessary to attract. It's not just about the money, but the ability to have other things, like maybe think about having a child care option and elder care options as benefits to incentivize people. You're not necessarily trying to beat out other companies again. It's this DIY mentality that I see happening in women, that they're just not going to settle for whatever it is that you're willing to give, because if you don't, they're just going to go find a way to get it for themselves, because that's just how we operate.
I love that. All great things all around. Okay, let's move on to our next section, how to better coach and train those on your team to keep your talent. We talked a little bit about some of this, but Stephanie, let's kick things off with you. What are some tips and tricks sales leadership can use when coaching and training new sales talent to meet and exceed their goals?
Yeah. So I would say I am a huge fan and celebrator of situational leadership. It is, if you can figure out how to perfect situational leadership, you really can do it in any role. So not just sales coaching and sales leadership, but in any role. If you have not heard of situational leadership or know what it is, it's truly about leading someone the way they need to be led based on what their aptitude is for the certain skill, right? So take something like an SDR, brand new, first time being behind that computer and picking up that phone. Most of us are naturally, especially as women, natural leadership style is supporting, right? So we're supporting our teams. We're making sure that we are checking in on them, asking how they're doing, right? That's our natural self, is to want to support our people. But what that SDR actually needs is hardcore training, right? They need to be able to told what to do, how to do it, and be given very clear direction. And oftentimes that's missed from sales leadership. After that training and they gain some of that confidence and experience, then you move into being a true coach, where you're asking them the questions and getting them to really think about what the answer could be, but you're still giving them the answer. And many times this is the step that people 100% forget about. They immediately go to support and don't give them the answer because they think that if you're coaching and you're giving the answer, then you're not like actually allowing them to take ownership of the behaviors that they're going to apply. And so being able to go through these motions, right, of training, coaching, then supporting, right, as they start to perfect that skill, and then into mentorship, you're having the opportunity to bring people through all of the steps that they need to perfect a skill. And so I use it often. I use it with my VP level leaders. We even can get to the point in one of the organizations I worked in where we called out where we were, like, hey, I think I'm really in a D1 here, which is development zone 1, so that we can lead the way that they need to be led. And so if you don't have experience in this type, I would guarantee if you Google it, it'll come up and give you lots of fun videos, but it's been really helpful, especially for those first-time leaders trying to figure out how to coach and motivate their teams. Great little trick of the trade for sure.
Wonderful. I love that. All right, Marissa, what do you do with your team to help? Any tips and tricks to help coaching or training them? And I think it's interesting, especially on like a new talent versus existing talent that you have. And I think there's potentially some differentiators there. I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to Stephanie's point, you have to coach in an individualistic approach. Of course, I have like a set way that I manage my one-on-ones as far as like a structure, but people learn in different ways. So, how I actually am then walking through that information or that data, it varies based on the experience, or even like the way that I have come to understand is how I should be giving that information to that individual. So what I mean is like, some folks, it's more like bulleted data driven, because that may be how it's easier for them if they're more analytical. Others that I've got that are a little bit more like expressive, that they know we're able to talk on like a higher level. If they're strategic, but that's just how they're able to gather that information. Depending on their experience, there are different things that I do ahead of time, like asking them to come prepared with certain things. And there's a different sort of outline versus folks that have been in the role for 6 years. I expect them to know what I'm going to be walking through on those deals, and then how I can help support them. Regardless, I think there may be some skills that we have, nailed down that is extremely successful, but that doesn't mean you check off the box. Like you consistently have to keep using and, flexing those muscles. So we'll have like call coaching sessions, still have, buddy pair ups within my team. I think where it needs to be collaborative, because I'm constantly learning. I expect open feedback as a manager to them. And so I expect them to be open for that sort of feedback as well, because that's how we get better. So, I definitely treat some of the newer folks in a different sort of, I'd say it's a bit more structured, to make sure that they get that down. And then I pull back a little bit on how often I'm doing the check-ins and that sort of structure once they have that, versus some of the more experienced or tenured folks on my team. And then it's more, how can I get you that 1% better? And what are some other ways that we can take it to the next level? So I think in order to be successful, I do essentially like a team mapping, where I map out the people within my team and map out where I feel like they are as far as their experience level, and where could be some areas for improvement. And I also want to make sure that they have some experience ideas that they have. Like, this is something I want to get better at. This is a skill I'd like to, hone in on. And so that we're on the same page there. And I update that every quarter, because we're constantly evolving. So I think that helps me make sure that I'm not just going through the motions, as sometimes we can do when we have a busy schedule.
Definitely. As a young manager and just freshly new as a manager, and I think that there's a lot that you can learn from even just the women that are in this audience, but whether you're in sales, whether you're in any industry as a manager, I think this is really amazing. All right, Carol, I'd love to understand your science and psychology around any tips and tricks that you have in that area. I think that's really where I'm looking for your advice here on training and coaching.
Yeah, this is my world that I love to live in. And so when you're training and coaching, the first thing I think that you need to think about is that what you're trying to do is enact some kind of a behavioral change. You're there to help to facilitate it, to help encourage it, to help walk them through it. And so before we start any kind of a behavioral change, one of the first things that science tells us is that in order for change to happen, there needs to be a gap big enough between where we are and where we want to be. I mean, why else would we go through all of the work and the effort and the risk of going through a change if we're not going to get drastically different results than before? We won't. So that's why that first step that I train managers on when we're training them how to coach is to identify what are the personally meaningful goals of each of the individuals on your team. Everyone is, someone had mentioned that everyone's motivated differently. Absolutely. There's different styles of motivation. There's different levels of motivation. And so this is an exercise to not only help the manager to build rapport with their team member, but then also for that team member to identify, where's my gap? What's the thing that's going to motivate me to put my feet on the floor every morning when the going gets tough? Because it will. We always strive to get 1% better, but it goes back and forth like this, and we have to anticipate those things. And that is why these goals are so important, because it's the thing that's going to drive us. The second step to this is there's something that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is where we overestimate our skills and we underestimate our weaknesses. And so to do the team mapping piece of things like Marissa was talking about, which I love that phrase, I might have to borrow it, is we use with an objective evaluation to understand each team member's individual mindsets and skill sets and where they're at so that we can develop together an individual action plan based on those. This does a couple of things. It helps them to reduce the Dunning-Kruger effect where they overestimate their strengths and weaknesses and underestimate the weaknesses. It removes my bias based on my own experiences, but then it creates a sense of, someone had mentioned, getting them to realize things. It creates an awareness within the individual of, oh, so that's why that keeps happening to me kind of a thing. And we can start to understand the root cause of the behavior that we're trying to change. The third thing, and this is for, managers, is really getting clear on getting training and coaching for yourself on how to coach. One of the analyses that I've done, there's data from Objective Management Group. They've evaluated over 2 million sales professionals on sales-specific behaviors and mindsets. So I did a quick analysis and asked, of the 500,000 sales managers that I have in this database and the team that reports to them, what's the biggest impact? And what I found is that when managers had been coached on how to coach, and they did it half of the time, their team had 49% more skills. I mean, imagine what your team could do with 49% more skills. Executing on that is a combination of what Stephanie and Marissa just talked about, of there's different situations. And to understand which type of coaching someone needs, I ask 3 questions. The first is, do they know what to do? Example, like if they're a BDR, they're brand new, they have no idea what they're supposed to do. There's going to be a lot of intensive training and hand-holding and answer giving, because if they don't know, they can't do it. Then the next question I ask is, can they actually do it? Do they have the confidence? Do they have the skill set? Do they need the practice? So this might be role play. This might be group coaching where we get them comfortable in the actual execution of the knowledge they have. The third part is trickier. This is the will they do it. When they get on the call and they're faced with the buyer and the objection comes up, and even though they know that what they should say and they can do it, will they actually? Now that's a mindset thing. So coaching needs to be able to answer each of those 3 questions as to which style of coaching is right given where this person is at in those 3 areas. The things that I've seen as a result from using this kind of a scientific behavioral process is people actually not only start to change their skill sets, but they even start to change the way that they view sales and their results. I've seen people go from on plan and in 6 months, they're selling the largest deals in company history, simply because we were able to connect some of those dots for them. So like I said, I could go on and on about this, but it's really, think of it as behavioral change, not just trying to get them to do what you need them to do.
I love that. I could listen to you talk about the behavioral and psychology of all of that for hours. But Karen, why don't you bring us home on this topic? Love to just get your tips and tricks on either training your internal people or even those that you work with and support on a client basis, how you're training and coaching them as well to open those doors.
I'm going to take it from a slightly different angle and bring up the idea of the fact that even if you hire somebody who has some experience and they've been somewhere else, the recipe that has worked for them somewhere else may not work for them in your environment. So there are some things that you can do, whether somebody is new to this job or just new to a different sale, a different kind of sale, that will help to jumpstart, because that's what you wanted to know, is like, how do we jumpstart a new person? So whether it's a brand new person to sales or a person who's been selling for a long time, who is now in a different environment. And these are some of the things that we do internally when our door openers join us. They certainly have a lot of experience, but they don't necessarily have experience door opening for a particular client. So how do we make that successful coming out of the gate? The first thing we do is around preparation. The second thing we do is about the demonstration of proficiency within the messaging. And the third is the demonstration of proficiency within workflow. So let me just talk about a couple of these things. When it comes to the preparation, what is it that we can prepare them with that will help them come out of the gate strong and remove some of the risk of not being as successful in terms of results? So a couple of things. One is target. is looking at target from a very strategic standpoint. And before you start pulling all of the wonderful data out of ZoomInfo, what does your target need to be? Who's going to feel urgency around having that meeting? Why would they find your company to be an obvious solution? Why would they willingly pay what you want to charge for your services? All of the things that make a wide world of prospects into a narrow world of prospects who will feel urgency around meeting you. Leadership can do that thinking ahead of time. And it's a little different when it comes from sales leadership versus marketing leadership. Marketing goes wide, sales goes a little bit more narrow. And so it's really important to nail target. Once you nail target, then you can nail message. So I'm not talking about the marketing messaging. That's not the message that's on your website and in your advertising. This is sales messaging, which is one-to-one, the spoken word. What do you say to one individual, a prospect, who will lead that person to go from one step in their thinking to the next step? There's not 1,000 different ways to say something. There's probably maybe 10, 15 great ways to say something in a situation that will help that prospect know that going forward is going to be the right decision. Same with answers for objections. There's not 1,000 ways to answer the objections. There's probably 10 to 15 exact right ways. Well, what can you do to help your new salespeople to know exactly what those words and phrases are? And then, of course, that person needs to put it in their own words and be authentic in the delivery. But what is the intent? What is the concept? And when leadership does that well ahead of time, then instead of having a scenario where a seller will sit next to another seller who's successful and hear that, they used to call that a ride along, now it's a sit next to, and just hear the person who's going through this, who's been successful, that doesn't mean that the person who's learning from that rock star has internalized the messaging at all. So that when that person is in a performance moment, is that person going to be able to come out with it? So documenting the sales language, which is different than marketing messaging, is really critical. Have that ready for your onboarding. Have your seller not just learn it, but internalize it, role play it on their own, and then demonstrate their proficiency offline, not in a performance moment, in a role play scenario where they have to figure out how do they uncover which objection they're facing so they know which answer to use. Once you've given them the green light, now it's time for them to go live. That's what we do. Even though our door openers are very, very senior, none of them go live without this. And so that way we make sure that we are not practicing on our clients' prospects. The last part of that is workflow, the demonstration of proficiency of workflow. CRM is a self-reported tool. So somebody may have heard from somebody that they're not interested, but that may not be true. The prospect may not have heard anything that was of interest. And if the seller changes what he or she says, then so will the outcome change. Well, it's very hard when a CRM is a self-reported tool for the seller to tell the leader, this is what's going wrong. If they knew what was going wrong, they'd fix it themselves. So it's really helpful to do workflow training. Have somebody who knows what good workflow looks like, an efficient workflow looks like. Sit with, and you can do this virtually, we do it, sit with somebody as they're going through their workflow. Where do they go first, second, and third? Do they immediately go to their warm leads? Do they immediately go to their live conversations and see how to move those forward? Or are they all over the map? There's a lot of efficiency that can be gained by doing this, but without doing this, you'll never know how much more efficient you could be and how many more meetings, how many more closed sales. So preparation, the demonstration of sales messaging proficiency, as well as the demonstration of workflow efficiency. That's my contribution on the subject.
I love that. That's
Not that
wonderfully detailed out. Yes, it's wonderfully detailed out. I really, really appreciate all of the information. And I think I want to get to some questions that we're having coming through. Our next section, we're limited on time, but our next section is kind of fits within some of these questions that we're getting through. So I'd love to shift over to that and answer some of these questions. And Marissa, solely because I know you and I know what you do, wonderful work at ZoomInfo and our diversity and inclusion clubs and groups and things like that, I'd love for you to take a stab at this question. And then feel free for the rest of the speakers. I'd love for your input as well. But we do have an audience member that is asking, as a young Black woman, this is my first role as in sales as an SDR. How do you suggest I deal with people's implicit biases? We all have them, and the lack of knowledge about my identity, and when it gets in the way of me trying to advance for myself, whether it be for support, advice, mentorship, or opportunities. That was a lot. I'm sorry if I jumbled over that, but I'd love to get your perspective, Marissa.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's exciting. And congrats for it being your first job. Being an SDR is difficult. And while I'll never be able to speak to your lived experiences, they are real. And so I think the one way that you can strengthen yourself and your skills will come with lots of clear directive and practice, like to the point to what like Karen and Stephanie and Carol have said. Is the understanding, like I'm still doing it. I still have to role play. Like what Karen had said is understanding like with overcoming objections. Like when I had to do like a prospecting role, it was very much like an outbound, heavy cold calling role. I had my script, but I rewrote it. So it came in my voice. It sounded comfortable for me. I had a framework, but I made sure that when I picked up that phone and I was calling someone, I believed what I was saying, regardless of what I heard on the other line. And I practiced it so much that my tone, my intonation, my delivery was received. And like, you're going to get people that are going to hang up on you. You're going to get people that say no, but look at it more as like a challenge to turn that no into well, wait a minute. Like maybe I'll give you a second. And like, I know I'm catching you out of the blue, but I've got something that you need to hear. And there are ways for you, to Karen's point, that you can practice that. And the more that you get comfortable with that, it will come. And it will allow you to get that confidence to book those meetings. And then I think working with your manager to understand in that full transparency, my goal is X, whatever that may be. Please help me understand what are the KPIs that I need to hit so that I can work towards that goal. And so that you are having those conversations to understand what that path looks like. And so that, you're not just hitting, but you're exceeding them. And I think to that point, something that I've always done at my role in any job is try to build my own personal brand. And I know and what I mean by that is that if there's an opportunity where I can get involved, if there's an opportunity where, whether it's volunteering, where I can sit in, have my seat at a table, raise your hand. It can be scary. Like if there's a demo slam, if there's, someone that they need extra, put yourself out there, because what I'll tell you is even though it's frightening, it will help you start to build that confidence. And then when other opportunities come up, your name will be on that short list.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Anyone else that would like to add to that question, or can repeat it again if you'd like?
I have just one thing to add. And this is in relation to like when you have to advocate for yourself and people don't really hear you or understand. There's a couple of things that you can do. One is to try and find an ally or an advocate who can also speak on your behalf to management or leadership, especially where you're new to a company and new to a role, looking for someone who can help to mentor you or help you to understand sort of how things work, but then also be an advocate for you. I think that's something that, I don't know what it is, and maybe it's just me, but sometimes I feel like having other people asking them for help makes me somehow less or weaker. It's not the case. It actually is the thing that's going to make you stronger. I think the other thing is that when you're trying to deal with biases that people have towards you, is to, I think Marissa just said this beautifully, like look at your own language. Sometimes when people are offending us and they don't know that they are, and they see our reaction and suddenly they get defensive. So one of the things that I have found that works really well for me, actually, I'm just thinking of a conversation that happened yesterday with this, is I had to say, look, when you say that, this is how that makes me feel, or this is what I hear from my own experience. Is there another way that we can go about talking about this that isn't going to trigger me or you? And just saying like this, when I hear that, this is what I hear, or when I hear you say that, or when this happens, this is how it makes me feel, is just a way to help them be more aware of how their actions or behaviors are impacting you. I found a lot of more success at that than a lot of times people don't want to hear why we're offended by something, and that's okay, as long as you understand how it's making me feel right now. I think those are two things that are really hard for me to do, and I'm sure it's hard for a lot of others, but I've also found that when I am able to do it in a way that's, I'm not being triggered and emotional about it, then it's something that's received pretty openly.
That's fantastic. And I don't mean
that,
go ahead, Karen.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rebecca. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. We just got under a minute left.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that we need a part two. I think that's what we're talking about here. We've definitely had a lot to say, and audience members, we appreciate you being able to join us today, as well as the wonderful panelists that we had on this fireside chat. I wish we had like a little fireplace behind us, because this was definitely a nice little cozy conversation that we just had, and really, I think a safe space for women to be able to have their voices heard. So we definitely want to have another one of these come around. So audience members, again, thank you for joining us. We will send out the recording within 24 to 48 hours after we conclude today. So you guys keep an eye on that. And if there is, you can always submit surveys in that recording as well. So if there is any questions or any feedback that you'd like to provide for us on this webinar, please do so. We really appreciate all of that. And again, thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful day.